Hey guys, welcome back to our channel. I hope you're getting comfortable finding that perfect position where your shoulders can finally let go of the day's tension. Tonight, as you dim the lights and settle in, I wanted to take you on a journey to a place where stone meets sky, where massive triangles of limestone have stood, watch over the changing world for millennia, the Great Pyramids of Giza. Ancient, when Rome was young, silent witnesses to the rise and fall of empires. Tonight we won't be exploring how they were built or who built them, though those are fascinating questions for another night. Instead, we'll be drifting through a different kind of mystery. What did people in the Middle Ages think when they looked upon these enormous structures? There's something beautifully ironic about it, isn't there? These monuments, built with such precision thousands of years ago, stood tall and unwavering while medieval minds, separated from the pyramid builders by as much time as we are separated from medieval people, struggled to comprehend them. The pyramids remained unchanged, yet the stories told about them transformed completely. Imagine that for a moment. The same stones that an ancient Egyptian might have touched in 200 and 500 BCE also felt the tentative fingers of a 12th century traveller. The same shadow that cooled a pharaoh's priest might have provided respite to a medieval pilgrim. The structure remained constant, but the eyes that beheld it brought different stories, different explanations, different worlds. Tonight, as you feel your breathing slow and your mind begin to drift, we'll explore how people in the Middle Ages, from humble pilgrims to learned scholars, from Christian monks to Muslim travelers, tried to make sense of these massive monuments that seem to defy human capability. We'll wander through their explanations, their myths, their wonder, and yes, sometimes their fear. The pyramids have always been more than just stone. They've been containers for our human need to explain, to understand, to connect with something greater than ourselves. Even now, as you lie there, possibly thousands of miles from Egypt, these ancient structures are working their magic on your mind, drawing you back through time, inviting you to ponder, to wonder. So pull your blanket a little closer. Let your head sink deeper into your pillow. There's no need to remember every detail of what I'm about to share. Instead, just let the words wash over you like gentle waves, carrying you to distant shores of time, to an age when the modern world was still unimaginable, when the stars seemed closer, and when massive triangles of stone inspired both awe and confusion. And if this helps you find some calm tonight, consider subscribing or supporting the channel, but only if it brings you peace. There's no pressure here, just stories, drifting through the darkness, keeping you company as you journey towards sleep. Now, let's travel back together, across the centuries, to a time when the world was flat, when Jerusalem was the center of the universe, and when three enormous pyramids on the edge of the desert represented a profound mystery that demanded explanation. You awaken to the soft creak of wooden wheels on a dusty road. The year is 1267, and you are a pilgrim traveling through Egypt. Your clothes are rough against your skin, the fabric worn from weeks of travel, the wool scratches at the back of your neck where sweat has dried and salt has crystallized. Your feet ache in leather shoes that have molded to the shape of your soles but provide little protection against the sharp stones of the path. The air smells different here, a mixture of dust and spice, animal dung and humanity. Nothing like the damp earth and wood smoke of your village back home. You've been traveling for months now, part of a larger group making its way toward the Holy Land. Egypt was not your destination, merely a passage, but the caravan master insisted this route was safer than others. You take a sip from your water skin. The liquid is warm and tastes faintly of the leather container, but it soothes your parched throat. The sun beats down relentlessly. You've never known heat like this. Not the gentle warmth of European summers, but a fierce, consuming heat that seems to press down from above and radiate up from below simultaneously. The cart jolts over a particularly large stone, and you grasp the wooden side to steady yourself. Your palm comes away coated in dust. Everything here is coated in dust. Your clothes, your skin, the inside of your mouth. It feels as though you're slowly being buried alive, grain by grain. Around you, your fellow travelers murmur prayers or exchange quiet observations. Most are pilgrims like yourself, though there are a few merchants among the group. One, a cloth trader from Venice who has made this journey 3 times before, has been a font of information about the strange lands you're passing through. We're approaching Giza, he says now, his voice carrying over the creak of wheels and the snorting of the mules that pull your cart. Keep your eyes to the horizon. You'll see something remarkable soon. At first you're not sure what he means. The landscape has been monotonous for days. Flat expanses of sand and scrub, occasional palms clustering around sources of water, mud brick villages that seem to rise directly from the earth itself. But then, as the cart crests a gentle rise, you see them. 3 massive triangles rising from the desert floor, their limestone surfaces catching the sunlight and reflecting it back with an intensity that makes you squint. They seem impossibly large, impossibly perfect. You've seen cathedrals being built back home, Notre Dame in Paris, the great church at Canterbury, but nothing like this. Those structures took generations to build, hundreds of workers, the finest architectural minds in Christendom, and still they don't approach the scale of what you're seeing now. Joseph's granaries, whispers the woman sitting beside you, crossing herself, where the grain was stored during the 7 years of plenty, to feed the people during the 7 years of famine. You nod, because this is what you've heard as well. It's what everyone in Europe knows about these structures. The Bible doesn't mention them specifically, but learned men have connected the story of Joseph in Egypt with these massive storehouses. It makes sense. What else could they be? Who would build something so enormous, if not to serve some crucial purpose? Yet, as you draw closer, doubt begins to creep in. The structures are solid, not hollow, as granaries would need to be. Their sides are smooth, their peaks sharp. How would grain be stored in such a shape? How would it be retrieved? The explanation that has satisfied you for a lifetime suddenly seems inadequate in the face of the reality before you. The caravan stops for the night within sight of the pyramids. As the sun begins to set, casting long shadows across the sand, you find yourself drawn to them. Despite your exhaustion, despite the warnings about desert bandits and dangerous spirits, you walk away from the safety of the campfires toward these massive monuments. Up close, they're even more impressive. The blocks of stone are enormous, each one larger than the cart you've been traveling in. Yet they're fitted together with barely a finger's width between them. You place your palm against the sun-warmed stone and feel a strange connection to whoever placed this block here. Was it truly built in Joseph's time? The stone feels older somehow, as though it has absorbed the passage of time itself. A local man approaches, an Egyptian who has attached himself to your caravan as a guide. His Arabic is broken, his Latin worse, but he makes himself understood through gestures and the few words you share. Ancient kings, he says, pointing to the pyramids. Not Joseph. Older, much older. He makes a sweeping gesture with his arm, indicating the passage of a great deal of time, then points to the top of the largest pyramid, where the remains of a smoother casing stone can still be seen. Once, he says, all shine like mirror. See from Jerusalem. You doubt this is true. Jerusalem is far too distant, but the image captivates you nonetheless. These enormous structures, gleaming like mirrors in the desert sun, visible for miles around. Who would build such a thing? What kind of king commands such power? In your world, even the greatest monarchs, Louis of France, Edward of England, could never accomplish something of this magnitude. You sleep that night under the stars, the pyramids looming over your dreams, like mountains that have somehow been shaped by human hands. In the morning, when you resume your journey, you look back at them for as long as you can, watching them grow smaller on the horizon, but never quite disappearing, as though they've imprinted themselves on your vision. You will never see them again in your lifetime, but you will tell your children about them, and in the telling, the pyramids will transform once more, not just Joseph's granaries now, but something more complex. Your description will be imperfect, colored by your own understanding, and the limits of your vocabulary, just as the pyramids you describe will be different from the pyramids you saw, which were themselves different from the pyramids as they once were, and different still from the pyramids as they were meant to be. In this way, the story of the pyramids continues to evolve, passed from traveler to listener, from generation to generation. The stones remain the same, but the meaning we give them changes with each pair of eyes that beholds them, each mind that contemplates their existence. In the quiet scripturia of early medieval monasteries, where the scratching of quills on parchment provided rhythm to days structured around prayer, Christian scholars grappled with the pyramid question. Theirs was a world where everything had its proper place in God's design, where events and structures served as signposts pointing toward divine truth. The massive stone triangles in Egypt demanded explanation, not just what they were, but why they were, and how they fit into the Christian understanding of history. Gregory of Tours, writing in the 6th century, echoed what had become the prevailing Christian explanation. Joseph, when he ruled Egypt second only to Pharaoh, filled these triangle-shaped structures with grain during the 7 years of plenty. The great bishop never saw the pyramids himself. Few Europeans did in those days, but his explanation satisfied a deep need for coherence in the Christian narrative. It was elegant in its simplicity. The Bible told of Joseph interpreting Pharaoh's dream, predicting 7 years of abundance followed by 7 years of famine. It told of Joseph being placed in charge of gathering grain during the good years, but it never specified where this enormous amount of food was stored. The pyramids, with their massive size, seemed the obvious answer to a question the Bible left unanswered. Saint Isidore of Seville, whose encyclopedic etymologies served as a primary reference work throughout the Middle Ages, perpetuated this view. Writing in the early 7th century, he described the pyramids as the storehouses of Joseph, and explained their triangular shape as ideal for storing grain. The wider base could hold more, while the narrowing toward the top prevented spoilage by allowing proper ventilation. There was comfort in this explanation. It tied the mysterious structures to a familiar biblical narrative. It gave them purpose within the Christian understanding of history. It made the alien familiar, the pagan Christian. The pyramids weren't just random monuments built by forgotten pharaohs. They were physical evidence of biblical truth, stone witnesses to God's providence. But even in this age of faith, doubt occasionally crept in. Those few Europeans who actually saw the pyramids sometimes questioned the granary theory. The solid construction didn't seem practical for grain storage. The narrow passages inside some pyramids that had been breached couldn't possibly have been efficient for moving large quantities of food in and out. Such doubts were rarely expressed openly. To question the Joseph connection was to cast doubt on a comfortable explanation that had been repeated by authorities both secular and religious. It was easier to assume that one's own understanding was flawed than to challenge the collective wisdom of centuries. Besides, the alternative explanations were often less palatable to medieval Christian sensibilities. Local Egyptians, when pressed, might speak of ancient burial practices of kings entombed with treasures, but this smacked of paganism, of the worship of false gods, of practices the Church had worked for centuries to eradicate from Europe. Better to see the pyramids as granaries than as monuments to heathen kings. Some pilgrims returning from journeys to the Holy Land that took them through Egypt reported inscriptions on the pyramids in strange characters, not Latin, not Greek, not even the Arabic that had become common in the region after the Islamic conquest. These were in fact hieroglyphics, the ancient Egyptian writing system long fallen out of use. But to medieval Europeans, unable to decipher these symbols, they appeared as mysterious signs, perhaps even magical in nature. Magical thinking was never far from medieval Christianity, existing alongside orthodox belief like a shadow. Some began to whisper that the pyramids might be repositories not just of grain but of ancient knowledge, of secrets from before the flood. Perhaps some suggested they were built by Seth's children, who foresaw the coming deluge and created sturdy structures to preserve human wisdom through the catastrophe. Bede, the great English monk and historian writing in the early 8th century, took a slightly different approach. While still connecting the pyramids to Joseph, he emphasized their symbolic significance rather than their practical purpose. The triangular shape, he suggested, represented the Trinity, with the solid foundation representing God's unchanging nature, and the point directed toward heaven symbolizing mankind's spiritual ascent. As the early Middle Ages gave way to the High Middle Ages, as Europe slowly recovered from the chaos following Rome's collapse, and began to develop new intellectual traditions, the Christian understanding of the pyramids evolved as well. New translations of ancient texts became available, offering alternative explanations. Contact with the Islamic world, particularly during the Crusades, exposed European thinkers to different traditions of pyramid lore. Yet through all these changes, the Joseph connection remained remarkably persistent. It appeared in manuscripts and travelers' accounts well into the 15th century, even as other explanations gained credence. Even as European scholars began to develop more accurate understandings of ancient Egyptian civilization, the idea of Joseph's granaries retained its hold on the popular imagination. There was something deeply reassuring about this connection between biblical narrative and physical reality. The pyramids were there, undeniably real, massive beyond reckoning. If they were indeed Joseph's granaries, then other biblical stories must be equally true. The physical existence of these enormous structures validated faith, providing tangible evidence of God's word, and so for much of the medieval period, Christian Europe held fast to this explanation. The actual purpose of the pyramids, royal tombs designed to launch pharaohs into the afterlife, remained obscured behind the veil of biblical interpretation. The truth would have been unpalatable anyway. Too pagan, too focused on death, too concerned with a concept of afterlife that differed from Christian teaching. The persistence of the granary theory reveals something important about how medieval people made sense of the world. They did not separate sacred from secular history as we do today. For them, all history was sacred history, all events part of God's plan unfolding in time. The pyramids couldn't just be impressive structures built by a civilization with different beliefs. They had to connect to the overarching Christian narrative that gave meaning to all of human experience. And yet, beneath the official explanations, quiet doubt continued to stir. Those who saw the pyramids firsthand often returned with questions they couldn't quite articulate, with a sense that the neat explanation didn't capture the full reality of what they had witnessed. These doubts, rarely expressed in writing, passed in whispers between travelers, creating a counter-narrative that would eventually help give birth to a more historical understanding of these ancient monuments. As Europe wrestled with biblical interpretations of the pyramids, A different kind of engagement was taking place in the Islamic world. The conquest of Egypt in the 7th century brought these massive structures under Muslim control, and Islamic scholars approached them with a combination of scientific curiosity and cultural respect that produced insights very different from their Christian contemporaries. The Islamic Golden Age, that flowering of art, science, mathematics, and philosophy that stretched roughly from the 8th to the 14th centuries, created an intellectual environment where observation and measurement were valued alongside religious interpretation. While European scholars were largely content with the Joseph's granaries explanation, Muslim thinkers measured, explored and theorized about the pyramids in ways that were remarkably modern. Abd al-Latif al-Baghdadi, visiting Egypt in the late 12th century, approached the pyramids with the eye of a scientist. A physician by training, he was accustomed to close observation and skeptical of explanations that contradicted physical evidence. In his account of his travels, Kitab al-Ifadah wal-Itibar, Book of Instruction and Admonition, he explicitly rejected the granary theory that held such sway in Europe. "I have seen the pyramids," he wrote, "and I have observed their structure thoroughly. It is impossible that they were granaries or anything other than tombs." He noted the solid construction, the narrow passages, the burial chambers that had been discovered inside those pyramids that had been breached. All evidence, he argued, pointed to their function as monumental tombs for ancient rulers, not content with casual observation. Al-Baghdadi attempted to measure the Great Pyramid, calculating its height and the length of its base with remarkable accuracy given the tools available to him. He noted the precision of the stonework, marveling at how tightly the massive blocks fit together. Not even a needle or a hair can be inserted between any two stones, he wrote, an observation that continues to impress modern visitors. Ibn Battuta, perhaps the greatest traveller of the medieval world, visited the pyramids in the 14th century during his extensive journeys, which would eventually take him from his native Morocco to as far as China. His account reflects both scholarly interest and the weight of Islamic tradition that had developed around these structures over centuries of Muslim rule in Egypt. Unlike many European visitors who saw the pyramids as alien structures connected to their own religious narrative, Ibn Battuta understood them as part of a cultural heritage that Islam had inherited. The Prophet Muhammad had instructed his followers to seek knowledge and wisdom wherever it might be found, and many Muslim scholars saw ancient Egypt as a source of valuable knowledge, even if its religious practices were considered misguided. Islamic astronomers took particular interest in the pyramids' alignment with celestial bodies. The precision with which they were positioned in relation to the cardinal directions impressed scholars who understood the mathematical complexity involved in such calculations. Some suggested that the ancient Egyptians must have possessed advanced knowledge of astronomy and mathematics, perhaps even sciences lost to the current age. This appreciation for ancient Egyptian technical accomplishments did not prevent the development of distinctly Islamic folklore around the pyramids. Local traditions spoke of jinn, supernatural beings mentioned in the Quran, inhabiting the structures. Some stories claimed that pre-Islamic Egyptian kings had built the pyramids with the help of these spirits, forcing them to move the massive stones through magical means. The mathematician and astronomer Abu Rayhan al-Biruni, writing in the early 11th century, attempted to calculate the age of the pyramids based on historical records and astronomical observations. His conclusion that they were built thousands of years before his time, long before the time of Joseph, contradicted both Christian and some Islamic popular beliefs, but reflected the empirical approach characteristic of Islamic science during this period. The Sufi tradition within Islam, with its emphasis on mystical experience and hidden knowledge, developed its own interpretations of the pyramids. Some Sufi writers saw them as symbols of spiritual ascent, their triangular shape representing the soul's journey from the broad base of material existence to the singular point of union with the divine. Others suggested that the pyramids contained hidden chambers where ancient wisdom was preserved, accessible only to those with the spiritual preparation to understand it. Ibn Khaldun, the great 14th century historian and philosopher, approached the pyramids from a sociological perspective that was centuries ahead of its time. In his Muqaddimah, Introduction to History, he suggested that only a highly organized society with sophisticated division of labor could have produced structures of such magnitude. The pyramids, in his view, were evidence of the advanced state of ancient Egyptian civilization, not miraculous creations or the work of supernatural beings. Yet for all this scientific and philosophical engagement, Islamic popular culture also embraced supernatural explanations. Tales circulated of the pyramids as talismans protecting Egypt from natural disasters, of hidden treasures guarded by ancient curses, of strange lights seen at night moving around the structures. In markets and coffee houses, such stories entertained and frightened in equal measure. The tension between empirical observation and folkloric imagination created a rich tapestry of pyramid lore in the Islamic world. Unlike the relatively monolithic Christian explanation, Islamic understanding of the pyramids was multifaceted, embracing scientific measurement, historical analysis, religious interpretation, and magical thinking simultaneously. This intellectual diversity reflected the cosmopolitan nature of medieval Islamic society, where scholars from different religious and cultural backgrounds exchanged ideas freely. Christians and Jews living under Islamic rule contributed their own perspectives, and creating a dialogue about the meaning and purpose of the pyramids that was far more nuanced than anything taking place in medieval Europe. As the Islamic Golden Age began to wane in the later medieval period, some of this knowledge was lost or forgotten. The empirical approach gave way to more mystical interpretations. Scientific observations were preserved in manuscripts that gathered dust in libraries, while fantastic stories continued to spread through oral tradition. The hard-won insights of scholars like al-Baghdadi and Ibn Khaldun would not be rediscovered by European Egyptologists until centuries later. And yet, something of this tradition survived. In the writings preserved in libraries from Baghdad to Cordoba, in the folk memories of Egyptian communities, in the careful measurements and observations recorded by generations of Muslim scholars. While medieval Europe mostly clung to the biblical explanation, the Islamic world had already begun the long process of uncovering the historical truth about these ancient monuments. The melancholy of this intellectual history lies in how much was known, then forgotten, then had to be rediscovered. Knowledge is not a straight line of progress but a cycle of insight and loss of clarity followed by confusion. The pyramids stood unchanging through it all, waiting for each new generation to make sense of them anew. While scholars debated the purpose and meaning of the pyramids in manuscripts written in Arabic and Latin, the people who lived in their shadow developed their own understanding of these massive structures. Local Egyptian communities, descendants of the ancient builders, though changed by centuries of Greek, Roman, Christian and Islamic influence, preserved oral traditions that differed significantly from both Christian and scholarly Islamic interpretations. These folk beliefs didn't exist in isolation. They absorbed elements from each ruling culture while maintaining connections to more ancient understandings. The result was a rich tapestry of stories and practices that acknowledged the pyramids not just as historical for the farmers who tilled the fertile lands along the Nile. The pyramids were familiar landmarks, as constant as the river itself. They marked the boundary between the black land of cultivation and the red land of the desert, between life and death, between the mundane world and the realm of spirits. Children grew up in their shadow, hearing stories passed down through generations about who had built them, and why, what dwelled within them, and how to respect their power. They were built by the giants who lived before the flood, one tale went. That's why the blocks are so large. What seems enormous to us was easy for them to lift. This explanation, with its echoes of biblical and Quranic flood narratives, made intuitive sense to people who couldn't imagine how their ancestors could have moved such massive stones without supernatural assistance. Other stories attributed the construction to King Solomon, who in both Jewish and Islamic tradition commanded the jinn, supernatural beings capable of extraordinary feats. Solomon ordered the jinn to build the pyramids as a demonstration of his power. These stories claimed the jinn complied, but they hid messages in the stones that only they can read, promising to reclaim the structures when Solomon's seal no longer holds them in check. Some local traditions connected the pyramids to the stars, suggesting that they were built to mirror celestial configurations. When certain stars align above the pyramids, elders would warn, the doors between worlds open briefly. Those who enter the pyramids on such nights may find themselves transported to strange realms, or they may disappear entirely. Such beliefs led to various taboos, times when it was considered dangerous to approach the structures, rituals to perform when passing by them, protective amulets to wear when in their vicinity. More practical folk traditions focused on the pyramid's perceived influence on the local environment. Some farmers believed that the shadows cast by the pyramids affected the fertility of the soil, with land that received a precise amount of pyramid shadow producing the best crops. This led to careful observations of shadow patterns throughout the year, and adjustments to planting schedules accordingly. The pyramid's shadow also served as a kind of clock and calendar. Local inhabitants noted how it moved throughout the day, and changed length with the seasons. When the shadow reaches that rock, a farmer might say, "It's time to bring the animals in from pasture," or, when the shadow no longer touches the edge of the village at sunset, "It's time to plant the barley." In this way, the pyramids became integrated into the agricultural rhythms that governed daily life. Health-related beliefs flourished as well. Some traditions held that sleeping in the pyramid's shadow could cure certain ailments, particularly those affecting the bones and joints. Others warned that spending too much time near the pyramids could cause dreams to become unnervingly vivid, or lead to a wasting sickness as the structures drew life energy from those who lingered too long in their presence. The pyramid's connection to death and burial was never entirely forgotten in local lore. Despite the dominance of the granary theory in official Christian teachings, Egyptian communities remembered that the structures had something to do with preserving the dead, though the specifics had become muddled over time. This led to beliefs that the pyramids could influence the journey of souls after death. If a person dies within sight of the pyramids, one tradition claimed, their soul will find its way to the afterlife more easily. Another suggested that praying for the deceased while facing the pyramids would help their spirit find peace. Some even believed that particularly virtuous souls might be invited to dwell within the pyramids after death, joining the ancient guardians who protected the structures from desecration. Treasure stories were perhaps the most persistent form of pyramid folklore. Despite centuries of exploration and looting that had removed most valuables long ago, tales of undiscovered chambers filled with gold and jewels continued to circulate. These stories often included protective curses, invisible guardians who would strike down anyone entering with greed in their heart, or diseases that would afflict those who disturbed the ancient treasures. My grandfather's cousin's friend, a typical story might begin, found a hidden entrance near the base of the smallest pyramid. He crawled inside and discovered a room filled with golden statues. He took just one small figurine as proof, but within a week his skin began to rot, and he died in agony. The figurine disappeared the day of his funeral. Such tales served both to excite the imagination and to discourage actual treasure hunting, which local communities generally viewed as disrespectful to the ancestors. Ceremonial practices developed around the pyramids as well. Young men might prove their courage by spending a night alone near the structures. Couples hoping for children might walk around the base of a pyramid hand in hand at dawn. Elders facing death might ask to be taken to where they could see the pyramids one last time, believing this would ease their transition to whatever came next. These folk traditions existed alongside official religious interpretations, sometimes in tension with them, sometimes incorporating elements from them. When imams or priests condemned certain practices as superstitious, or even heretical, people might continue them in secret or modify them to appear more in line with orthodox teaching. The resilience of these beliefs speaks to the deep human need to make sense of the monumental, to domesticate the overwhelming through story and ritual. For local communities, the pyramids were not distant historical artifacts, but present realities that shaped their understanding of the landscape, their place in it, and their connection to the past. Perhaps the most poignant aspect of these folk traditions is how they preserved, however imperfectly, echoes of the pyramid's original purpose: to ensure immortality, to connect earth and sky, to maintain cosmic order. The specifics changed over millennia, adapted to new religious frameworks and cultural contexts, but something essential remained, passed down through countless generations of those who lived in the pyramid's elongating shadows. The journey to Egypt was arduous in medieval times. Whether traveling by sea, facing the unpredictable Mediterranean with its storms and pirates, or by land through territories fractured by political divisions and religious conflicts, reaching the pyramids required determination, resources, and no small amount of courage. Those who made the journey and recorded their observations provide us with some of the most vivid accounts of medieval encounters with these ancient structures. John Mandeville, or rather the anonymous author writing under that name, produced one of the most widely read travel accounts of the Middle Ages. His travels, compiled in the mid-14th century, was a curious blend of first-hand observation, second-hand reports, and pure fantasy. Mandeville claimed to have visited Egypt and seen the pyramids, which he described as Joseph's granaries, in keeping with the prevailing European belief. "These granaries are marvelously made of great stones and well masoned," he wrote. "The smallest stone is 30 feet long, and has strange writings carved upon it in various languages. Some say they are the names of the lands from which grain was collected, and others say they are spells to preserve the grain from corruption." Mandeville's account reflected the ambivalence with which many medieval travelers approached the pyramids. On one hand, he repeated the familiar biblical explanation. On the other, he acknowledged the existence of alternative interpretations. His description of the size of the stones was exaggerated, but captured the overwhelming impression they made on viewers accustomed to smaller-scale European architecture. More reliable was the account of Benjamin of Tudela, a Spanish Jewish traveler who journeyed through the Mediterranean world in the 12th century. His observations were generally more measured than Mandeville's, though still colored by the limitations of his time. He specifically challenged the granary theory, noting that the pyramids were solid structures with only narrow passages inside, making them impractical for grain storage. "They are constructed of large stones," he wrote, "and on them are inscriptions in the ancient language which no one today knows how to read. People say that these are tombs of the ancient kings who ruled Egypt before the flood, and that they placed their wealth and precious objects within these structures." Benjamin's account is remarkable for acknowledging the pyramids' actual purpose as tombs, though he placed their construction earlier than was actually the case. His willingness to question the prevailing Christian explanation may have been possible precisely because, As a Jewish traveler, he felt less bound by Christian interpretative traditions. The German Dominican friar Felix Fabry, who visited Egypt in the late 15th century, provided one of the most detailed medieval European accounts of the pyramids. His Evagatorium in Terre Sanctae described not only the physical appearance of the structures, but also his own emotional and intellectual response to them. "I stood before the pyramid," he wrote, "and was struck first by fear at its immensity, then by wonder at its perfect construction, and finally by confusion at its purpose. For what king would expend such resources merely to create a monument to his own vanity? And if it was indeed built as a granary, as many claim, why are there not openings through which grain might be easily loaded and unloaded?" Fabry went on to describe his ascent of the Great Pyramid, a feat accomplished with the help of local guides who knew the best route up the crumbling corners where the casing stones had fallen away. The view from the top, he reported, was breathtaking, allowing him to see not only the sprawling city of Cairo, but also the course of the Nile stretching off toward the horizon. "From this height," he wrote, "one can understand why the ancient Egyptians considered their land the center of the world. The fertile river valley stretches like a green ribbon through the desert, supporting life in what would otherwise be barren waste. The pyramids stand at the boundary between this ribbon of life and the endless sands, sentinels marking the edge of the habitable world." William of Boldenselli, a German knight who traveled to Egypt in the early 14th century, was among the first European writers to explicitly reject the granary theory. After exploring the interior of the Great Pyramid, he concluded that it must have been a tomb for an ancient king. He described the sarcophagus he found in the king's chamber, noting its size and the quality of its workmanship. "This stone coffin," he wrote, "is large enough to hold a man and is made of a single piece of granite so hard that it resists all attempts to break it. It gives off a clear ring when struck, like the finest bell. Surely this was meant to hold the body of some great ruler, preserved with spices and wrapped in precious cloth according to the custom of the ancients." Not all travelers were so perceptive or honest in their accounts. Many simply repeated what they had read in earlier works, perpetuating errors and fantasies. Others embellished their experiences, claiming to have seen wonders inside the pyramids that almost certainly did not exist. Golden statues, magical fountains, ancient texts written on walls of crystal. These fabrications found eager audiences back in Europe, where the appetite for tales of exotic marvels was insatiable. Even those travelers who attempted to be accurate faced significant challenges. They lacked the historical context to understand what they were seeing. Without knowledge of hieroglyphics, they could not read the inscriptions they encountered. Without understanding of ancient Egyptian funeral practices, they misinterpreted the artifacts they found. And always they viewed these ancient structures through the lens of their own cultural assumptions and religious beliefs. Perhaps the most poignant aspect of these medieval travel accounts is the sense of transience they convey. Many travelers noted how the pyramids made them feel the brevity of their own lives, the impermanence of their civilizations. Standing before structures already ancient when Rome was young, how could they not reflect on the passing of empires, the fading of glory? "I thought of the king who commanded these pyramids to be built," wrote one anonymous pilgrim in the 13th century. "His name is forgotten, his kingdom fallen to dust. Only his tomb remains, and even that has been broken into, its treasures stolen, its sanctity violated. What then are the glories of this world, if even such mighty works cannot preserve a man's memory?" This sense of humility before the weight of time, this recognition of human mortality contrasted with the endurance of stone, runs through many medieval travelers' accounts. The pyramids served as memento mori, reminders of death, for Christian pilgrims already primed to contemplate the transience of earthly existence. For Muslim travelers, the pyramids often inspired reflections on divine power. Ibn Jubayr, visiting in the late 12th century, wrote, "Glory to him who has preserved these monuments through the ages. as a testimony to the insignificance of human power compared to his might, and as a reminder that even the greatest works of man eventually return to dust, while his creation endures. These travelers, Christian, Jewish, Muslim, carrying their different cultural frameworks and religious beliefs, all found themselves humbled by the same stones. Their accounts, fragmentary and imperfect though they may be, capture something essential about the human encounter with the monumental, that moment of awe when we confront something that exceeds our expectations, challenges our explanations, and forces us to reconsider our place in the long arc of time. As you drift toward sleep, imagine yourself joining these medieval travelers. Feel the hot Egyptian sun on your face, the rough stone beneath your palm, the vertigo of looking up at structures that seem to pierce the sky. Like them, you are just passing through, a momentary witness to monuments that have stood for millennia, and will likely stand for millennia more, collecting stories, gathering meanings, accumulating layers of human wonder. The meta dirigia, to measure, to quantify, to place numbers upon the seemingly immeasurable is perhaps one of our most persistent traits. For medieval travelers confronting the pyramids, this urge was particularly poignant. Here stood structures of such magnitude that they defied the measuring tools of the age, yet still visitors tried, stretching ropes along stone faces, counting paces around perimeters, holding up fingers at arm's length to gauge heights against the desert sky. The frustration of these attempts comes through clearly in many accounts. "I walked the base of the Great Pyramid," wrote an Italian merchant in 1346, "counting 523 paces from corner to corner, yet, when my companion did the same, he counted 531. We tried again and again, arrived at different numbers. Such discrepancies were inevitable. The shifting sands around the base made establishing a true starting point difficult. The enormous scale meant that even a slight deviation in direction could result in significant measurement errors by the time one reached the far corner. Height measurements proved even more challenging. Medieval Europeans had no instruments capable of accurately measuring such elevations. Instead, they relied on comparative estimates, trigonometric guesswork, or simply repeating measurements they had read in earlier accounts. The 13th century scholar Robert Grosseteste cited a height equal to 11 men standing one atop the other, while a Persian geographer of the same period claimed the Great Pyramid was as tall as an arrow shot directly upward can reach before falling back to earth. Poetic, perhaps, but hardly precise. Some attempted more sophisticated approaches. The Arab mathematician Abu Muhammad al-Khujandi developed a quadrant that could, in theory, be used to calculate height through angle measurements. Similar instruments were known, if not widely used, in Europe, yet even with such tools, accuracy remained elusive. Variables like distance from the base, uneven ground, and human error in reading small increments on primitive scales all contributed to widely varying results. These measurement attempts often led to comparisons with familiar structures from the travelers' homelands, comparisons that inevitably fell short. The cathedral at Milan, wrote one Venetian traveller, could fit within the base of the Great Pyramid with room to spare on all sides, and its tallest tower would reach perhaps halfway to the pyramid's peak. Such comparisons, while inexact, helped European readers conceptualize structures beyond their experience. Medieval Islamic scholars generally achieved greater accuracy in their measurements than their European counterparts, building on the mathematical traditions they had inherited from Greek, Indian, and Persian sources. Al-Masudi, writing in the 10th century, recorded dimensions for the Great Pyramid that were remarkably close to modern measurements, demonstrating the sophistication of Islamic mathematics and measuring techniques. But even the most careful medieval measurements contained inaccuracies, and these inaccuracies sometimes perpetuated the very mysteries they sought to resolve. When dimensions didn't form neat ratios or align with expected proportions, some concluded that supernatural forces must have guided the pyramid's construction. No human geometry alone could achieve such proportions, wrote one 12th century Islamic mathematician after struggling to reconcile his measurements with known geometric principles. The question of how the ancient Egyptians themselves had measured and laid out these massive structures puzzled medieval minds. Without understanding the sophisticated mathematics and astronomy available to pyramid builders, medieval scholars projected their own limitations onto the past. Some suggested that giants had built the pyramids precisely because normal humans couldn't possibly measure and align such enormous structures with such precision. The interior passages presented even greater measurement challenges. Narrow, dark, and often partly filled with debris, these corridors defied accurate measurement. Those brave or foolhardy enough to venture inside often emerged with wildly different accounts of passage lengths, chamber dimensions, and arrangement. Without accurate measurements, speculation flourished about what might lie in unexplored sections, hidden chambers, secret passages, repositories of ancient wisdom. Some medieval accounts included precise-sounding measurements that were almost certainly fabricated. A supposed height of exactly 1,000 royal cubits, or a base length of precisely 500 paces, satisfied the medieval love of round numbers and perfect proportions, but rarely reflected reality. These neater-than-reality figures made the pyramids seem more comprehensible, more intentional in their design, and thus perhaps less intimidating. Materials presented another measurement puzzle. How thick were the stone blocks? How much did they weigh? Without modern tools to calculate density and volume, medieval estimates varied enormously. Each stone weighs more than 10 oxen could pull, claimed one account. The smallest block would crush a wagon under its weight, stated another. Such imprecise descriptions emphasized the monumentality, but did little to advance understanding. The question of labor introduced yet another measurement challenge. How many workers were needed to build such structures? Medieval estimates ranged from the plausible to the fantastic. 10,000 men worked for 20 years, suggested one Arab historian, while a European account claimed 100,000 slaves toiled their entire lives, and many were buried within the very walls they built. Without understanding ancient Egyptian construction techniques, medieval observers could only imagine the most brutally labor-intensive methods. Time itself became something to measure. How old were these structures? Here, medieval measurements failed most completely. With no concept of the true time depth of ancient Egyptian civilization, estimates clustered around biblical chronologies. The earliest attributions placed the pyramids before Noah's flood, while others associated them with biblical figures like Joseph, both options wildly inaccurate by modern understanding, but consistent with medieval timeframes. The cumulative effect of these measurement difficulties was profound. Unable to accurately quantify the pyramids, medieval observers fell back on qualitative descriptions: enormous, awe-inspiring, incomprehensible. The very failure of medieval technology to measure precisely enhanced the pyramids' mystery and power. They remained literally immeasurable, beyond the capacity of human tools to fully capture. This struggle to measure continues even today. Modern visitors with sophisticated cameras often report that photographs fail to convey the true scale of the pyramids. Something about their proportions, their relationship to the surrounding landscape, and their sheer mass resists being reduced to two dimensions or expressed in mere numbers. We know precisely how tall they stand, how much they weigh, how many blocks they contain, yet these figures somehow fail to capture their essential quality. Perhaps this is why the pyramids continue to fascinate us. In an age when we can measure the distance to distant galaxies and weigh subatomic particles, these ancient stones still manage to exceed our grasp. They remind us that measurement is not the same as understanding, that quantifying is not the same as uncomprehending. The medieval travelers who stretched their ropes along the pyramid bases and squinted up at their peaks were encountering this same humbling truth, that some things, even when physically present before us, remain just beyond the reach of our measuring tools, and perhaps even our full comprehension. Gold has always whispered to the human heart, promising power, security, beauty. When this whisper meets ancient monuments of mysterious origin, the result is almost inevitable: treasure hunting. Throughout the medieval period, the pyramids attracted those who dreamed not of knowledge, but of wealth, who saw in these massive structures not architectural marvels, but potential strong rooms where the riches of forgotten pharaohs might lie untouched, waiting for discovery. The most famous of these medieval treasure hunters was Caliph Abdullah al-Mamun, son of the legendary Harun al-Rashid of Arabian Nights fame. In the early 9th century, al-Mamun ordered his men to breach the Great Pyramid, driven by rumors of incalculable treasure sealed within. The original entrance had been carefully concealed by the ancient builders, so al-Mamun's workers began forcing a tunnel through the solid limestone blocks on the pyramid's north face. It was back-breaking work, even with the resources of a caliphate behind it. Workers heated the limestone with fire, then doused it with vinegar and cold water to create cracks they could exploit with hammers and chisels. Slowly, painstakingly, they drove a rough tunnel into the heart of the pyramid. Legend has it that they were about to abandon the seemingly futile effort when they heard something fall inside the structure, perhaps a stone dislodged in an interior passage by their hammering. Encouraged, they adjusted their trajectory and eventually broke through into the descending corridor that had been sealed for millennia. What al-Mamun hoped to find reflected the medieval Islamic understanding of ancient Egypt, a civilization known for its wealth, wisdom, and supposed magical knowledge. Gold, certainly, but also perhaps scrolls containing forgotten secrets, magical talismans, astronomical instruments of uncanny precision. The pyramids were old enough, mysterious enough, to serve as repositories for anything the imagination could conjure. The reality proved disappointing. When al-Mamun's workers finally reached the king's chamber at the heart of the Great Pyramid, they found only an empty granite sarcophagus. No gold, no treasures, no scrolls of ancient wisdom. The burial goods that might once have accompanied the pharaoh had been removed centuries or even millennia earlier by tomb robbers who had accessed the chamber through passages unknown to al-Mamun. This pattern of forced entry, high expectation, and ultimate disappointment repeated throughout the medieval period. A 13th century Kurdish ruler ordered new explorations, convinced that al-Mamun had simply missed the true treasure chamber. Various European adventurers, arriving with the Crusades, organized their own expeditions. Local entrepreneurs offered to guide treasure seekers to secret entrances, for a fee of course. Each new attempt left additional scars on the ancient structures, but revealed no gold. These physical assaults on the pyramids were often justified by legends that gave moral sanction to the treasure hunting. One popular medieval story claimed that an ancient king had filled the pyramids with treasure during his lifetime, anticipating that his descendants might someday face poverty. Breaking into the pyramids was thus not theft but the claiming of an inheritance intended for future generations. Another tale suggested that pre-Islamic demons had hidden their gold inside the structures, making it legitimate plunder for good Muslims who would use the wealth in God's service. Christian treasure hunters had their own justifications. If the pyramids were indeed Joseph's granaries, as many Europeans believed, then perhaps they still contained wealth gathered during the 7 years of plenty described in the Bible. Alternatively, if they were monuments to pagan pharaohs, any treasure within was fair game for Christians who would put it to better use in service of the true faith. These moral justifications masked baser motives, simple greed, the universal hunger for easy wealth. Few who attacked the pyramids with picks and hammers were driven by scholarly curiosity or religious zeal. They sought gold, and in this single-minded pursuit, they were willing to damage monuments that had already stood for thousands of years. The irony is profound. In seeking treasure, these looters were destroying something far more valuable: the historical integrity of humankind's most enduring architectural achievements. Each new tunnel, each forced entry, each block removed and broken compromised the structures and erased potential evidence about their construction and purpose. Gold, had it been found, would have benefited a few for a brief time. The knowledge lost through these destructive treasure hunts might have enriched our collective understanding for generations. Not all medieval interaction with the pyramids was so destructive. Some visitors were content to project their treasure fantasies onto the structures without actually attempting to break in. Travel accounts describe imagined riches in vivid detail: chambers filled with precious metals, jewel-encrusted statues, coins heaped like sand dunes, while acknowledging that the writers themselves had not ventured inside to verify these claims. Such accounts often included warnings about the dangers awaiting would-be looters: mechanical traps, poisonous insects, collapsing passages, and supernatural guardians all featured in these tales. "Those who enter seeking gold find only death," wrote one 12th century chronicler, recounting a story of treasure hunters suffocated by mysterious vapors inside the Great Pyramid. These cautionary elements may have reflected genuine concerns about the physical dangers of entering unstable ancient structures, or they may have been embellishments designed to discourage competition in the treasure hunting business. The supernatural guardians described in these accounts varied according to the cultural background of the writer. Christian accounts mention demons or the restless spirits of the pagan dead. Islamic traditions spoke of particularly powerful jinn assigned to protect the ancient wealth. Local Egyptian folklore described the curses of ancient priests still active after millennia. In all these traditions, the punishment for greed was swift and terrible: blindness, madness, withering disease, or sudden death. Despite these warnings, the allure of pyramid treasure proved too strong to resist. Throughout the medieval period, fresh damage appeared as new generations of treasure hunters tested their luck, and their theories about where within these enormous structures the imagined wealth might be hidden. Some focused on the chambers already discovered, convinced that secret doors in their walls must lead to the real treasure rooms. Others insisted that the true riches must lie beneath the pyramids, in crypts cut into the bedrock below their bases. By the late medieval period, much of the facing stone that had once covered the Great Pyramid, giving it a smooth, gleaming surface, had been removed, not by treasure hunters, but by builders who repurposed the precisely cut limestone blocks for mosques, fortresses, and bridges in nearby Cairo. This was a different kind of treasure hunting: practical, systematic, treating the pyramids not as containers of wealth, but as wealth themselves, as convenient quarries of pre-cut building material. This repurposing at least found productive use for the ancient stones. The same cannot be said for most treasure hunting expeditions, which left nothing but damage in their wake. Tunnels weakened structural integrity. Fires set to break limestone blocks left scorch marks still visible. Centuries later, graffiti carved by disappointed looters defaced walls that had previously remained unmarked for thousands of years. Perhaps the saddest aspect of this medieval treasure hunting is how it misunderstood the true nature of the treasure the pyramids contained. The real value lay not in gold or jewels, but in the testament they offered to human ingenuity, cooperative effort, and the desire to transcend mortality through lasting achievement. The treasure was the pyramids themselves, their mathematical precision, their astronomical alignment, their defiance of time's erosion. This was wealth of a different kind, cultural, intellectual, spiritual, but such treasure does not glitter in the sun or jingle in the purse. It cannot be carried away, melted down, or spent at market. It requires a different kind of appreciation, a recognition that some forms of wealth belong not to individuals, but to humanity collectively, across time. This understanding lay beyond the reach of most medieval treasure hunters, just as the gold they sought lay beyond their grasp, existing primarily in their imagination, rather than in the stone chambers they so desperately tried to breach. There is a knowledge that lives in the hands, a wisdom that resides in calluses and work-strengthened fingers. When medieval stonemasons, carpenters, and other craftsmen encountered the pyramids, they brought with them not just the cultural frameworks of their time, but also this embodied understanding of materials and techniques. They viewed these ancient structures not through the lens of religious symbolism or treasure-hunting greed, but through the practical appreciation of fellow builders, separated by millennia, but united by the shared experience of coaxing form from stone. "I have worked stone all my life," wrote a French mason who visited Egypt while returning from Jerusalem in the late 12th century, "yet I cannot comprehend how these joints were made so perfect. My finest work would look crude beside even the most ordinary blocks in these monuments." This humility before superior craftsmanship appears repeatedly in the accounts of artisans who encountered the pyramids, a professional respect that transcended time and cultural differences. What particularly impressed medieval craftsmen was the precision. European cathedral builders were certainly capable of impressive feats of stoneworking. The delicate tracery of Gothic windows, the perfectly balanced weight distribution of rib vaults, but these relied on different techniques than those employed by the ancient Egyptians. The sheer scale of individual blocks in the pyramids, combined with their tight-fitting joints, represented a level of precision that seemed almost impossible to medieval eyes. An Arab glassmaker from Damascus, visiting the partially stripped Great Pyramid in the 11th century, marveled at the remnants of casing stones still in place near the base. "The blade of my finest knife cannot be inserted between these stones, though they each weigh more than 10 men together could lift. How were they placed with such exactness? How were they cut so perfectly flat? These questions disturb my sleep, for I work with my hands every day, yet cannot imagine achieving such perfection." This professional bafflement led to numerous theories about how the pyramids might have been constructed. Some medieval craftsmen suggested that the stones must have been cast rather than cut, that the ancient Egyptians had somehow discovered a way to pour stone like bronze into molds, achieving perfect shapes that way. Others proposed that the blocks had been cut when the limestone was somehow softer, perhaps recently quarried and not yet fully hardened by exposure to air. More practical-minded artisans focused on the tools that might have been used. A blacksmith from Bologna wrote of examining scratch marks on partially worked blocks abandoned near the pyramids. "These are not made by any chisel I know. The cuts are too clean, too straight. What manner of metal held an edge sharp enough to slice limestone as though it were cheese? We have no such steel in our forges today." The question of lifting and placing the massive blocks particularly fascinated those with engineering experience. Medieval Europe used various cranes, pulleys, and winches for construction, but nothing capable of raising blocks weighing tons to heights of hundreds of feet with such apparent ease. Some craftsmen proposed elaborate systems of earthen ramps, arguing as engineers rather than mystics that only the gradual application of force through simple machines could achieve what they saw before them. A particularly thoughtful analysis came from a Moorish architect who had worked on the Great Mosque of Cordoba. After studying the Great Pyramid for several days, he wrote, "Each block was surely moved many times. First roughly cut at the quarry, then transported by river, then dragged to the construction site, then finished to its final dimensions, then raised to its position, then adjusted to fit perfectly with its neighbors. Each movement required different tools, different skills, different workers. The coordination of this effort exceeds the capabilities of any building master I have known." This recognition of the organizational complexity behind the pyramid's construction represented a more sophisticated understanding than many contemporary religious or scholarly interpretations. Craftsmen, familiar with the practical challenges of coordinating even modest building projects, could appreciate the administrative and logistical achievements represented by the pyramids as much as the technical ones. Some medieval artisans attempted to reproduce, on a smaller scale, what they observed in the pyramid builders' work. A stone carver from Florence described spending days trying to achieve the same tight-fitting joints he had seen in Egypt. "I selected the finest tools, the best stone I could find. I measured 10 times before cutting once. I polished until my arms ached, and still I could not match the precision of those ancient workers. Either they possessed secrets we have lost, or they had patience beyond anything known in our hurried age." This sense of lost knowledge, techniques and approaches that had once been possessed but were now forgotten, runs through many artisans' accounts. Unlike scholars who might attribute the pyramid's construction to supernatural forces or mythical giants, craftsmen recognized human handiwork, albeit of extraordinary skill. For them, the mystery was not whether humans could have built these structures, but how they had done so with such precision and on such a scale. The question of time investment particularly struck medieval builders accustomed to multi-generational cathedral construction projects. A master mason from Cologne, himself working on a cathedral begun by his grandfather and unlikely to be completed in his lifetime, wrote, "The pyramids remind us that great works require great time. In our age, patrons grow impatient, demanding quick results. These ancient builders worked toward a vision that many who laid the first courses would never live to see completed. This patience, this commitment to work whose fulfillment lies beyond one's own life, perhaps this is the greatest skill we have lost." Beyond specific technical questions, medieval artisans often expressed a kind of silent kinship with the anonymous workers who had built the pyramids. A woodcarver from Damascus wrote movingly of running his fingers along chisel marks visible in some interior passages. Another man's hand held the tool that made this mark. His arm guided the strike. His eye judged the depth. Though he has been dust for thousands of years, his work remains, and through it, I can almost feel the pressure of his hand on the chisel handle, sense the satisfaction he must have felt at a clean cut well made. This connection between craftsmen across vast stretches of time represents something profound, a recognition that despite differences in religion, language and culture, certain experiences of working with physical materials create a kind of understanding that transcends such boundaries. The satisfaction of a joint that fits perfectly, the frustration of a tool that breaks at a crucial moment, the ache in shoulders after a day of reaching overhead. These embodied experiences changed little over millennia. Perhaps most touching in these artisans' accounts is the humility they express, not a quality always associated with skilled craftsmen, who in medieval times as now, often took considerable pride in their abilities. Yet before the technical achievements of the pyramids, Even the most accomplished medieval builders found themselves humbled. "I thought myself a master of my craft," wrote one stonemason, "until I stood before these monuments. Now I know myself to be merely a student, and not a particularly promising one at that." This professional humility speaks to something universal in the human relationship with the pyramids. Whether approached through religion, science, or craft tradition, these monuments have a way of making us feel small, not just physically, as we stand before their immensity, but conceptually, as we struggle to fully comprehend the achievement they represent. For medieval artisans, this understanding was perhaps more immediate, more visceral than for most. They knew exactly how difficult it was to shape stone, to make it conform to human intention, and in that knowledge lay both their appreciation of the pyramids and their bewilderment at how such perfection had been achieved so long ago. In shadowed chambers lit by guttering candles, in gardens where astrolabes tracked the movement of celestial bodies, in laboratories filled with strange vessels and unfamiliar scents, another kind of pyramid lore developed during the medieval period. For mystics, alchemists, and esoteric philosophers, these ancient structures were not merely architectural marvels or historical curiosities, but repositories of profound secret knowledge, their very dimensions and proportions encoding wisdom from a golden age long past. "The pyramid is more than stone," wrote an anonymous 13th century alchemical text attributed to a certain master Albertus. "It is knowledge given form, truth made tangible. Its angles and ratios contain the harmonies of creation itself, waiting for those with eyes to see and minds to comprehend." This perspective, that the pyramids embodied mathematical and geometric principles reflecting cosmic truths, found fertile ground in medieval intellectual traditions that sought correspondence between the material world and spiritual realities. The triangle itself carried powerful symbolic associations across multiple cultural traditions. In Christian mysticism, it evoked the Trinity, three sides forming a single shape, mirroring the three persons in one God. Islamic geometric art had long recognized the triangle as a fundamental form, from which complex patterns could emerge. Jewish Kabbalah saw in triangular formations representations of divine emanations flowing from unity into multiplicity. But for medieval alchemists, the pyramid's shape suggested the classical elements: the square base representing earth, the triangular faces fire rising upward toward its elemental home in the heavens. The interior chambers and passages were interpreted as symbolic of the stages of the great work, the alchemical process of purification and transformation that could supposedly turn base metals into gold and, more importantly, perfect the human soul. Each chamber in the Great Pyramid corresponds to a stage in our inner transformation, claimed a 14th century alchemical treatise of uncertain origin. The descending passage represents the initial dissolution, the stripping away of impurities. The ascending passage signifies sublimation, the rising of the purified essence. The king's chamber embodies the final conjunction, where opposites unite in perfect harmony. Few medieval alchemists had actually entered the pyramids themselves, but this didn't prevent them from mapping their mystical processes onto these distant structures. Astrological interpretations flourished as well. Reports of the pyramid's precise alignment with cardinal directions suggested to medieval astrologers an advanced understanding of celestial mechanics. Some believed the pyramids had functioned as observatories, their passages allegedly aligned with particular stars or constellations at significant dates. Others went further, suggesting that the pyramids somehow channeled astral influences, concentrating cosmic energies for purposes now forgotten. A Persian astrologer writing in the 12th century claimed, "When Sirius rises in perfect alignment with the southern shaft of the king's chamber, The influence of that potent star flows directly into the heart of the pyramid, charging the granite sarcophagus with celestial power. Those who know the proper rituals can harness this energy for works that common men would call miraculous. Such claims merged astronomy with more magical thinking, reflecting the fluid boundaries between science, mysticism, and superstition characteristic of medieval intellectual life. For most medieval thinkers, there was no contradiction in viewing the pyramids simultaneously as marvels of mathematical precision and as magical devices. The mathematics itself was seen as magical in the sense of revealing divine harmonies underlying creation. Numerical mysticism particularly attached itself to the pyramids. Various medieval sources attempted to find significant numbers in the structure's measurements, counting steps, calculating ratios, measuring angles. When actual measurements proved disappointing, theoretical true measurements were often substituted, creating a circular reasoning where the pyramids were made to yield whatever numerical relationships the interpreter sought to find. The perimeter of the base divided by twice the height gives the sacred ratio found throughout nature, wrote one 13th century geometer, proceeding to demonstrate how this ratio, approximating what we now call pi, appeared in various natural phenomena. That his measurements of the Great Pyramid were significantly inaccurate did not detract from his conviction that the ancient builders had intentionally encoded this mathematical constant in their design. More elaborate numerical interpretations connected the pyramids to biblical chronology or apocalyptic prophecy by assigning numerical values to measurements, often using creative unit conversions and selective rounding. Certain Christian mystics claim to find predictions of significant biblical events or calculations pointing to the end of days. The number of courses of stone from base to apex foretells the years from creation to judgment, declared one such text, offering complicated calculations that conveniently pointed to dates within the author's expected lifetime. Jewish mystical traditions found their own significance in the pyramids. Some Kabbalistic texts suggested that the structures encoded secrets about the true pronunciation of divine names or represented physical manifestations of the Sephiroth, the emanations of God described in Kabbalah. The visible pyramid mirrors an invisible reality, wrote a Spanish Jewish mystic of the 14th century. Its chambers correspond to levels of divine revelation, its passages to the channels through which divine light flows from the infinite to the finite. Islamic mystical interpretations often focused on the pyramids as containers of antediluvian wisdom, knowledge from before Noah's flood that had been deliberately preserved by ancient sages foreseeing the coming destruction. Sufi writers sometimes described the pyramids as stone books, their measurements and proportions a kind of text that could be read by those with sufficient spiritual insight. The outer form teaches one kind of knowledge, accessible to any who approach with open eyes, wrote an Egyptian Sufi of the 13th century, but within that visible form lies another teaching, there still only to the inner eye, and within that second teaching lies a third, accessible only to those who have completed the greater purification. The pyramid is thus a text with endless depths, revealing itself according to the reader's capacity for understanding. This concept of layered meanings, that the pyramids could simultaneously communicate different truths to observers at different levels of spiritual development, permeated medieval mystical interpretations across religious boundaries. It created a kind of interpretive flexibility, where apparent contradictions could be reconciled as simply reflecting different levels of reality, or different stages of insight. Perhaps the most persistent mystical belief was that the pyramids contained hidden chambers still undiscovered, repositories of ancient texts or devices preserving knowledge from before the flood or other prehistoric calamities. The visible chambers are merely outer courtrooms, claimed a 12th century text attributed to a Hermetic sage. The true sanctuary lies deeper, protected by barriers both physical and magical. waiting for those worthy to receive its secrets. This belief in hidden repositories occasionally intersected with treasure-hunting motivations, but for true mystics, the treasure sought was knowledge rather than gold. Some described secret libraries containing texts from Atlantis, devices that demonstrated principles of natural philosophy lost to later ages, or magical objects of great power. Those who seek with pure intent may be granted access to the Chamber of Records, promised one esoteric text, where the history of our world before current memory is preserved in crystal tablets that cannot be destroyed by time or elements. Yet the poignancy of these mystical interpretations lies in their expression of a very human longing, the desire to connect with lost wisdom, to believe that the answers to fundamental questions have already been discovered and merely await rediscovery. The immense age of the pyramids made them natural repositories for such projections. If they had already stood for thousands of years, preserving their secrets despite war, religious changes, and natural disasters, perhaps they indeed contained something precious from humanity's past, something that might illuminate our future. For medieval mystics staring up at these enormous triangles of stone, the possibility that they might encode solutions to the great mysteries, mortality, suffering, humanity's purpose, proved irresistible. The soft desperation of seeking answers in stone persists even today, as new generations project their own questions onto these ancient monuments, hoping that somehow, in their angles and chambers, the answers we seek have been waiting all along. Power recognizes power across the vast expanse of time. When medieval monarchs gazed upon accounts or illustrations of the pyramids, or in rare cases, beheld them with their own eyes, they experienced a unique form of recognition. These were not merely architectural curiosities, but monuments to authority that had transcended death itself, preserving the names and legacies of rulers long after their mortal remains had returned to dust. For kings and queens whose own obsessions with dynasty, legacy, and remembrance often dominated their thoughts, the pyramids represented an achievement beyond even their considerable resources, immortality made manifest in stone. Here lies a king who still commands respect though his name is forgotten, wrote a Castilian chronicler accompanying King Alfonso X on a diplomatic mission to the Mamluk Sultanate Our Lord gazed upon the Great Pyramid with unusual stillness, as though seeing in its weathered face a mirror reflecting truths about power that are seldom spoken aloud in royal courts. This recognition that even the mightiest works of monarchs might one day become anonymous monuments appears repeatedly in accounts of royal encounters with the pyramids, a sobering reminder of mortality's ultimate dominion, even over those who ruled nations. Yet this humbling effect paradoxically intensified royal fascination. If previous kings had managed to erect monuments that defied time's usual erosions, perhaps contemporary monarchs might achieve similar feats of memory preservation through their own grand projects. The very scale of the pyramids appealed to the medieval royal imagination. These were works that only a ruler commanding vast resources could have commissioned, expressions of authority writ large upon the landscape. Frederick II Hohenstaufen, Holy Roman Emperor and King of Sicily, developed a particular obsession with Egyptian antiquities during his reign in the early 13th century, known as Stupor Mundi. He encompassed the world for his wide-ranging intellectual interests and cosmopolitan court. Frederick maintained extensive diplomatic relations with the Ayyubid rulers of Egypt, exchanging lavish gifts that often included antiquities. Though he never personally visited the pyramids, He commissioned detailed reports from his ambassadors and collected smaller Egyptian artifacts for his famous Cabinet of Curiosities. The emperor asks specifically about the methods of construction, wrote one such diplomat in 1228, and desires accurate measurements of the Great Pyramid's dimensions. He wonders if similar techniques might be employed in his own architectural projects in Sicily and southern Italy. Frederick's interest went beyond aesthetic appreciation. Like many medieval rulers, he saw in the pyramids potential lessons for his own legacy-building endeavors. The collection of Egyptian artifacts became something of a competitive pursuit among Europe's royal houses during the later medieval period. Small statues, fragments of papyrus, and allegedly authentic pieces of pyramid casing stone commanded extraordinary prices when they appeared in Mediterranean ports. Royal collectors disputed their authenticity while simultaneously displaying them prominently to visitors, using these physical connections to ancient power to enhance their own prestige. In the French king's private chamber, reported a Florentine ambassador in 1376, there stands a small alabaster figure said to have been taken from beside the Great Pyramids of Egypt. His Majesty keeps it near his bed, and sometimes it is said consults it before making important decisions, as though some residue of ancient wisdom might reside in the stone. This semi-magical thinking about Egyptian artifacts reflected the medieval tendency to attribute supernatural properties to objects of great antiquity or distant origin. Diplomatic exchanges centered around Egyptian antiquities became particularly important in relations between European Christian monarchs and the Mamluk Sultanate that controlled Egypt for much of the later medieval period. Access to antiquities sites, permission for royal representatives to visit and measure the pyramids, and the exchange of artifacts served as bargaining chips in negotiations over trade privileges, military alliances, and the status of Christian pilgrims in the Holy Land. Sultan Gulawun's gift of a small sphinx to Philip IV of France in 1289 accompanied the renewal of commercial treaties between their realms. The carefully chosen gift spoke volumes. Here was a piece of Egyptian heritage being shared with a foreign monarch, a symbolic gesture of cultural power that subtly reinforced the Sultan's position as controller of access to Egypt's ancient wonders. European monarchs understood this dynamic well, recognizing that their interest in pyramids and other antiquities created leverage that Mamluk rulers could exploit in diplomatic negotiations. Not all royal interest in pyramids manifested through direct collection or visitation. Medieval monarchs also incorporated pyramid imagery and Egyptian themes into their own artistic commissions, borrowing the symbolic language of an ancient power to enhance perceptions of their own authority. Pyramid-shaped elements appeared in royal tombs, ceremonial objects, and even crown designs, creating visual connections between contemporary rulers and the pharaohs of old. Manuel I of Portugal, whose reign coincided with his nation's maritime expansion, commissioned a royal scepter in 1498 that incorporated miniature pyramid forms in gold and crystal, symbolically linking his growing empire with those of antiquity. The king has said that all great rulers must build for eternity, recorded a court chronicler, and that Portugal under his guidance shall create monuments to rival those of ancient Egypt. This emulative impulse reached its most literal expression when certain rulers attempted to construct their own pyramid-inspired monuments, while resource limitations prevented any medieval monarch from approaching the scale of the true pyramids. Several commissioned tombs and monuments with distinctly pyramidal elements. These structures served as visual quotations, deliberate references to ancient authority, intended to strengthen perceptions of the patron's own legitimacy and power. Perhaps the most poignant aspect of royal fascination with the pyramids lay in the shared longing for immortality that connected kings across ages. Medieval monarchs, for all their power, lived in constant awareness of their mortality, surrounded by memento mori in both religious teachings and practical reality. High infant mortality made dynastic succession uncertain. Disease could transform a vigorous ruler into a corpse within days. Assassination and warfare claimed many royal lives prematurely. Against this backdrop of mortality, the pyramids represented an almost unimaginable victory against time's decay. Whatever else might be said about the pharaohs who commissioned them, their names and deeds had survived millennia, their final resting places still standing, sentinel over the desert sands, while countless other royal tombs had crumbled to dust or been forgotten entirely. A French king allegedly whispered upon viewing a detailed illustration of the Great Pyramid, "What would I not give to be remembered thus 1,000 years hence?" This sentiment, rarely expressed so directly but evident in the pattern of royal patronage and collection, reveals the fundamental human vulnerability beneath the crown. Kings, for all their temporal power, could not command time as they commanded men. The pyramids stood as a tantalizing suggestion that perhaps with sufficient resources and vision, even time's dominion might be challenged. Medieval royal fascination with pyramids thus represented power recognizing power across millennia, a conversation between rulers separated by time, but united by the universal desire to extend their influence beyond death's boundary. When a medieval monarch contemplated the pyramids, he saw not just impressive architecture, but a gauntlet thrown down by long-dead fellow kings, a challenge to match their achievement of memory, and a sobering reminder that in time's longer perspective, even the mightiest rulers' works might become mere curiosities for future ages to ponder. The ink dries slowly on parchment, fixing in place what the artist has never seen with his own eyes. In the quiet of a monastic scriptorium or the bustle of a secular workshop, illuminators and scribes across medieval Europe attempted to capture the essence of monuments that existed for them only through travelers' tales, ancient texts and earlier, equally speculative illustrations. These medieval depictions of the pyramids, preserved in manuscripts ranging from world chronicles to adventure tales, reveal as much about the medieval mind as they do about the structures they purport to represent. I have drawn the great triangular mountains of Egypt as described by the merchant Pietro, who swears by all the saints that they are taller than the cathedral at Cologne, and smooth as polished marble, wrote an anonymous illustrator in the margins of a 13th century bestiary. This note, a rare glimpse into the process of medieval illustration, captures the fundamental challenge faced by artists attempting to depict the unfamiliar. They relied on verbal descriptions, filtered through cultural expectations and existing artistic conventions. The results were predictably varied and often wildly inaccurate. The pyramids appeared in medieval manuscripts as perfect triangles, stepped ziggurats, ornate towers with windows and battlements, conical spires, and occasionally as geometrically impossible structures that defied the laws of perspective. Some illustrations showed them standing in lush garden settings, others perched atop mountain peaks, and still others rising from the midst of bustling medieval-style cities, complete with church spires and fortified walls. A particularly imaginative rendering in a 14th century French romance depicted the pyramids as hollow mountains with elaborate Gothic doorways, their interiors containing vast halls where turbaned figures lounged on cushions amid piles of gold and jewels. The accompanying text described them as the treasure houses of ancient pagan kings, filled with riches beyond counting and guarded by fearsome spirits. Here the pyramids had been fully assimilated into the medieval Romance tradition, transformed into exotic settings for adventures involving magic and treasure-seeking. Other manuscripts approached the pyramids with more scholarly intent, attempting to accurately record their dimensions and appearance based on classical sources and contemporary accounts. The Liber Floridus, a 12th-century encyclopedia compiled by Lambert of St. Omer, included one of the more geometrically plausible early depictions, showing the pyramids as true triangular forms and attempting to indicate their massive scale by placing tiny human figures beside them. A particularly significant tradition of pyramid illustration developed in manuscripts of Pliny's Natural History, where scribes frequently embellished the Roman author's descriptions with their own visual interpretations. These ranged from relatively restrained geometric diagrams to elaborate scene paintings, where the pyramids formed backdrops for biblical events not historically associated with them, such as the flight of the Holy Family into Egypt. Here we see the Blessed Virgin resting in the shadow of the Great Pyramid during the journey to escape Herod's wrath, explains a caption in a lavishly illustrated 15th century Pliny manuscript from Burgundy. The accompanying miniature shows a distinctly European-looking Mary and Joseph with the infant Jesus picnicking beneath a stepped pyramid that bears more resemblance to a medieval bell tower than any Egyptian monument. This cultural and chronological displacement, placing biblical figures against anachronistic backgrounds, was entirely typical of medieval artistic practice, which prioritized symbolic and religious meaning over historical accuracy. Color choices in these illustrations were particularly revealing of the distance between representation and reality. Having never seen the actual limestone and granite structures, medieval artists applied color schemes drawn from their own aesthetic traditions and symbolic associations. Pyramids appeared in manuscript illustrations painted gold to signify immense wealth, deep red to suggest exotic Eastern origins, blue to connect them with the heavens, or in the case of moralistic religious texts, ominous black, to underscore their association with pagan burial practices. A 13th century English psalter depicted the pyramids in alternating bands of red and gold, creating a striped pattern that has no basis in reality, but may have been influenced by descriptions of banded Egyptian textiles that reached European markets. The great tombs of Egypt shine with many colors, claims the accompanying text, an entirely fictional detail that nevertheless persisted in European imagination for centuries. The most interesting manuscript depictions emerged when artists attempted to integrate accurate details from travelers' accounts into their existing visual vocabulary. An Italian world map from the early 15th century shows recognizably triangular pyramids, but places them amid palm trees described by pilgrims, while adding architectural elements familiar to European viewers, such as pronounced cornices and decorative finials at their apexes. The result is a hybrid image, neither fully accurate nor completely fantastical, but occupying an intermediate space, where new information struggled to overcome established convention. Scale presented a particular challenge for medieval illustrators. How could one convey on a small piece of parchment structures whose primary impression was one of overwhelming size? Some artists opted for symbolic representation of scale, showing tiny human figures prostrate in attitudes of awe before looming pyramidal forms. Others attempted more systematic approaches, including crude measurement notations or comparative height lines, referencing familiar structures. Twice as high as the Tower of London, notes one English manuscript beside its pyramid illustration. What these illustrations reveal about medieval understanding goes beyond simple questions of accuracy. They demonstrate the process by which unfamiliar concepts were gradually integrated into existing knowledge frameworks, a process of cultural translation that required compromise and approximation. When a 12th century German monk drew a pyramid as a stepped tower not unlike his own church's spire, he was making the unfamiliar comprehensible, through reference to the familiar, creating a visual metaphor that his audience could grasp. The transmission and evolution of pyramid imagery through successive generations of manuscripts also reveals the conservative nature of medieval visual tradition. Later illustrators often copied earlier depictions rather than seeking out more accurate information, resulting in the perpetuation and gradual distortion of initial misconceptions. An error introduced in one influential manuscript might be faithfully reproduced in dozens of later works, creating a parallel visual tradition, increasingly divorced from the physical reality of the monuments themselves. I have copied the pyramids exactly as they appear in the ancient book from our library, wrote a 15th century scribe, unconsciously documenting this process of internal reference that prioritized textual authority over observational accuracy. The result was a kind of visual Chinese whispers where each reproduction moved another step away from the original subject. This disconnect between representation and reality did occasionally trouble the more thoughtful medieval mind. A Dominican friar who had visited Egypt in person later examined a lavishly illustrated volume in his monastery's library, and added a marginal note. These pictures bear little resemblance to the true pyramids I beheld with my own eyes. They are simpler in form, unadorned with the battlements shown here, and of a uniform sandy color rather than these bright hues. Yet they inspire greater wonder in their plain vastness than any ornamentation could achieve. This tension between fantastical embellishment and the unadorned reality that was in many ways more impressive would not be fully resolved until the early modern period brought more systematic observation and the development of techniques for accurate architectural rendering. Medieval manuscript illustrations of the pyramids remained caught between worlds, too distant from their subjects to achieve accuracy, yet increasingly informed by genuine observations that complicated older, purely imaginative traditions. Even today, with our photographs, precise measurements and detailed structural analyses, we still struggle to capture the essential experience of the pyramids. Our technical accuracy has improved immeasurably, but something of the subjective human encounter, the sense of scale, the weight of time, the emotional impact of these monuments, remains as elusive to modern cameras as it was to medieval quills and pigments. Perhaps in this we share more with our medieval forebears than we might initially recognize, still reaching across time and distance, still trying to grasp and convey something that ultimately exceeds our representational capacities. The medieval manuscript artist, dipping his brush into ground lapis lazuli to paint a pyramid he would never see, was participating in the same fundamental human endeavor that continues today. The attempt to apprehend through art what cannot be fully captured, to make present what is absent, to bring close what remains distant. The inaccuracies of his work remind us of the limits of representation itself, even as the beauty and imagination of these illuminations testify to the pyramid's enduring power to inspire creative response across centuries and cultures. The weight of symbols presses upon human consciousness like gravity itself, invisible yet inescapable, shaping thought as surely as physical forces shape matter. Medieval minds, steeped in a world view where everything visible pointed toward invisible truths, found in the pyramids not merely stone monuments, but powerful metaphors that could express complex theological, philosophical, and social concepts. These ancient structures, encountered through texts and travelers' accounts more often than direct observation, became intellectual tools for understanding everything from divine order to the structure of human society. Consider the perfect triangle, wrote Nicholas of Cusa in the 15th century, how from a single point it expands outward, yet maintains its essential unity of form. Is this not like the Holy Trinity itself, from the Father proceeding the Son and Holy Spirit, distinct yet inseparable, many yet? This triangular symbolism found its most potent physical expression in the pyramid, whose form seemed to medieval Christian thinkers a natural emblem of Trinitarian theology. The pyramid structure, rising from a square base to a single point, provided a perfect visual metaphor for medieval conceptions of both divine and earthly hierarchies. Just as all lines in the pyramid converge toward its apex, medieval theologians taught that all creation progressed toward God as its ultimate point of unity. The image appeared repeatedly in mystical writings, where the pyramid represented the soul's journey from the multiplicity of material existence toward the singular perfection of divine unity. Hugh of St. Victor, the influential 12th century theologian, described spiritual growth as a pyramid of wisdom, broad in its foundation of basic virtue, but narrowing as one ascends toward the perfection of charity. For him and his contemporaries, the pyramid's form expressed both the difficulty of spiritual ascent, the narrowing path as one approached the divine, and the promise of eventual unity at the summit of contemplation. Beyond religious symbolism, the pyramid served medieval thinkers as a metaphor for proper social organization. In an era when hierarchical relationships defined every aspect of society, from feudal obligations to guild structures to monastic life, the pyramid offered a vivid image of ideal order, each person occupying their proper place, with authority flowing downward from a singular pinnacle of power, while stability was maintained by the broad base of common people. As in the great monuments of Egypt, wrote John of Salisbury in his 12th century political treatise Polycraticus, where each stone rests precisely where the master builder placed it, neither raising itself presumptuously higher nor sinking below its appointed station, so too must each member of the Commonwealth remain in their proper place for the stability of the whole. This application of pyramidal imagery to social theory reinforced medieval conceptions of a divinely ordained social order, where mobility between classes was limited and each person's role was predetermined by birth and station. The physical durability of the pyramids made them particularly useful metaphors for stability in an age haunted by awareness of impermanence. Medieval Europe experienced recurring waves of plague, warfare, and famine. Institutions rose and fell. Heresies threatened established religious authority. Against this backdrop of change and uncertainty, the pyramids represented a comforting vision of endurance, a proof that human works could, under the right circumstances, defy time's normal processes of decay. If the ancient pagans could build monuments that have withstood 4,000 years, argued a 13th century sermon, how much more shall the Church of Christ, founded on the true cornerstone, endure until the end of days? By invoking the pyramids as evidence of potential permanence, medieval Christian writers sought to reassure their audiences of the Church's stability despite worldly tribulations. The pyramid's geometry also served mathematical and philosophical purposes in medieval thought. The progression from point to line to plane to solid, represented in the pyramid's construction, as a point extends to create an apex, which extends to create edges, which enclose faces, which together form the three-dimensional structure, provided a powerful model for understanding dimensionality and the relationship between abstract mathematical concepts and physical reality. This mathematical symbolism reached its fullest expression in the works of Fibonacci and other medieval mathematicians who were beginning to rediscover and extend classical Greek geometry. For them, the pyramid represented not just a physical shape, but a conceptual bridge between arithmetic and geometry, between the abstract and the concrete. In the pyramid, wrote one anonymous 14th century mathematician, we see how number generates form and form embodies number, a perfect harmony of quantity and quality. The interior spaces of the pyramids, though known to medieval thinkers primarily through second-hand accounts, inspired metaphors of interiority and hidden wisdom. The contrast between the pyramid's simple, comprehensible exterior form and its complex, mysterious inner chambers and passages provided a compelling image for the relationship between exoteric and esoteric knowledge, between surface understanding accessible to all and deeper truths available only to those who undertook the journey inward. The common man sees only the outer shape, wrote a 14th century mystic, but the wise pilgrim penetrates to the heart of the mystery, finding within the stone mountain chambers of transformation, where the soul, like the Pharaoh of old, may prepare for its journey to eternity. This notion of hidden interior spaces as sites of spiritual transformation connected the physical reality of the pyramids with medieval mystical traditions that emphasized the inner work of spiritual development.
Even the geographic location of the pyramids, standing at the edge of the desert where fertile land met barren wasteland, made them potent boundary symbols in medieval thought. They marked the transition between abundance and scarcity, between the living and the dead, between the known world and the mysterious beyond. This liminal quality enabled them to function metaphorically as markers of transition in discussions of mortality, spirituality, and the boundaries of human knowledge. The pyramid stands half in the land of the living, where the Nile brings forth abundance, and half in the realm of death, where the desert stretches endlessly, observed a 12th century pilgrim's account. So too does the human soul exist between two worlds, rooted in material life yet reaching towards spiritual realms beyond our immediate perception. This capacity to embody transitional states made the pyramid a particularly versatile metaphor for medieval thinkers, grappling with the relationship between the physical and spiritual dimensions of existence. Perhaps most fundamentally, the pyramids served as metaphors for humanity's drive toward transcendence, the universal desire to create something that outlasts individual mortality. In a medieval world where the average lifespan was brief and physical reminders of death were omnipresent, the pyramids' defiance of time's normal processes represented a powerful symbol of humanity's refusal to accept temporary existence as the final word. Though our bodies return to dust, proclaimed a 15th century funerary sermon, our works may endure like the great monuments of antiquity, testifying to those yet unborn that we too walked this earth and reached toward heaven. This metaphorical connection between architectural permanence and spiritual immortality offered consolation in an age when death was an ever-present reality, and the desire for remembrance was a powerful, motivating force in both religious and secular life. What makes these medieval metaphorical uses of the pyramid particularly fascinating is how they transformed physical structures into vehicles for abstract thought. Stones became ideas, outlasting not just their builders, but their original purposes. the pyramids ceased to be merely Egyptian royal tombs and became instead conceptual tools for understanding divine nature, social order, mathematical relationships, and spiritual transformation. In this metaphorical afterlife, the pyramids achieved a kind of immortality, perhaps even more profound than their physical endurance. They entered the realm of pure symbol, where they continue to function as shorthand for hierarchy, stability, and transcendence, even in our contemporary discourse. When modern organizations display pyramid-shaped diagrams to represent their management structure, or when we speak of the pyramid of needs in psychology, we are unconsciously drawing on metaphorical associations that flowered in medieval thought, but have roots stretching back to humanity's first encounters with these monumental forms. These stones become ideas, demonstrate how physical artifacts transcend their creators' intentions, acquiring new meanings as they pass through different cultural contexts. The pharaohs who commissioned the pyramids could never have imagined how their tombs would fire the metaphorical imagination of people living thousands of years later in distant lands. Yet in becoming metaphors, these ancient monuments achieved perhaps the ultimate form of immortality, not just preservation of form, but perpetual renewal of meaning, speaking to each new generation in ways their creators could never have foreseen. Our journey through medieval perspectives on the pyramids has traversed territories both physical and conceptual, from the sun-baked stones of Egypt to the vellum pages of European manuscripts, from the calculating measurements of architects to the mystical visions of alchemists. Like travelers returning from a distant land, we now pause to reflect on what we have witnessed, the varied ways in which medieval minds encountered and interpreted these monumental structures that have outlasted empires and religions alike. What emerges most clearly from this exploration is the fundamentally human need to explain the inexplicable, to incorporate the anomalous into frameworks of understanding that make the world coherent. The pyramids presented medieval observers with a profound challenge: how to comprehend structures of such immensity, precision, and antiquity, created by a civilization whose language, religion, and cultural context had been lost to time. This challenge produced responses as varied as the individuals and traditions that encountered it, from scientific curiosity to religious interpretation, from artistic reimagining to political appropriation. When confronted with marvels beyond our experience, wrote a 13th century scholar in Toledo, we have three choices: to dismiss them as falsehoods, to attribute them to supernatural forces, or to expand our understanding to encompass new possibilities. Medieval responses to the pyramids demonstrated all three approaches, sometimes within the same text or tradition. Some accounts minimized the pyramid's scale or precision, unable to accept reports that seemed to contradict their understanding of what was possible. Others attributed their construction to giants, demons, or antediluvian magicians, placing them in a supernatural category that required no rational explanation. But the most interesting responses were those that struggled honestly with the challenge these monuments presented to existing knowledge, attempting to expand medieval understanding to accommodate new data about what human ingenuity could achieve.
Will Tatram of responses reminds us that the encounter between medieval Europe and ancient Egypt was not simply a meeting between two static cultures, but a complex dialogue across time, conversation in which both participants were themselves internally diverse and constantly evolving. There was no single medieval view of the pyramids, just as there was no single purpose or meaning to the pyramids themselves. Instead, we find a multiplicity of interpretations, each shaped by the particular intellectual traditions, personal experiences, and cultural contexts of individual observers. How understanding shifts through time while the stones remain unchanged emerges as a central theme of this exploration. The physical pyramid stood essentially unaltered throughout the medieval period,
yet their meaning was constantly in flux, reimagined by each new visitor, each new text, each new illustration. What Christian pilgrims saw as evidence of biblical history, Muslim scholars recognized as achievements of pre-Islamic civilization. What architects studied for technical insights, mystics probed for hidden wisdom. What kings viewed as symbols of enduring power, ordinary travelers experienced as humbling reminders of human insignificance before time's vastness. This mutability of meaning contains an important insight about how human cultures process the material traces of the past. Physical artifacts outlast the contexts that created them, leaving later generations to supply new interpretations that inevitably reflect contemporary concerns more than original intentions. The medieval afterlife of the pyramids illustrates this process with particular clarity, showing how ancient monuments were continuously reborn in new cultural contexts, accumulating layers of significance far beyond what their builders could have imagined. Our exploration also reveals unexpected connections between medieval viewers and ancient builders, threads of human experience that transcend the enormous gulf of time and cultural difference separating them. When a 12th century stonemason marveled at the precision of pyramid blocks, or when a 14th century monarch contemplated the immortality achieved through monumental architecture, they were engaging with fundamentally human questions about craft, mortality, memory, and achievement that would have been recognizable to the ancient Egyptians themselves. These connections remind us that beneath the surface differences of language, religion, and social organization, certain aspects of human experience remain constant: the satisfaction of skilled work, the desire to be remembered, the awe inspired by natural and human greatness, the struggle to comprehend our place in time's immensity. The pyramids have served as anchoring points for these universal concerns across millennia precisely because they speak to something deeper than any particular cultural moment. They address aspects of human existence that transcend historical specificity. Standing before these monuments, wrote a Venetian merchant I felt a strange kinship with their unknown builders, as though time's great river had momentarily paused, allowing me to reach across centuries and grasp a distant hand. This sense of connection across time represents perhaps the most profound gift that ancient monuments offer to later observers: a temporary transcendence of historical limitation, a momentary experience of human continuity that helps us locate our own brief lives within a larger narrative of shared experience. Yet alongside this sense of connection runs a parallel awareness of distance, the recognition that the past, for all its apparent accessibility through material remains fundamentally alien and partially incomprehensible. Medieval observers struggled with this tension, alternating between moments of imagined understanding and frank admission of bafflement. Though I have gazed upon these structures and measured their dimensions, confessed a 13th century scholar, I cannot claim to have penetrated their mystery, for the minds that conceived them worked according to principles I cannot fully recover. This humble acknowledgement of interpretive limitation represents another important thread in medieval responses to the pyramids, an intellectual modesty that recognized the partiality of all human understanding, especially when confronting artifacts from distant times and places. At their best, medieval thinkers maintained this productive tension between the desire to explain and the recognition that some things exceeded their explanatory frameworks, approaching ancient monuments not with confident declarations of mastery, but with questioning minds open to continuous revision and deepening insight. Looking beyond the medieval period, we can trace how understanding of the pyramids continued to shift through time, with each new era bringing its own interpretive lenses to these enduring structures. The Renaissance would approach them through the recovered texts of classical antiquity. The Enlightenment would subject them to increasingly scientific measurement and analysis. The Romantic era would find in them sublime triggers for emotional response, the colonial period would incorporate them into narratives of Western appropriation and Oriental exoticism. Our own time continues this process, viewing them through frameworks ranging from advanced archaeological techniques to tourism studies to considerations of cultural heritage and ownership. Throughout these transformations in understanding, the stones themselves have remained indifferent to the changing interpretations humans have imposed upon them. This stubborn materiality of the pyramids, their simple overwhelming bareness, has served as a check on human interpretive freedom, forcing each new generation of observers to confront physical evidence that sometimes confirms and sometimes contradicts their preferred explanations. The friction between enduring stone and shifting interpretation generates a productive tension that has kept the pyramids intellectually alive for millennia, preventing their meaning from ever being fully fixed or exhausted. Perhaps the most valuable insight to emerge from our exploration is the humility that comes from touching something that has outlived so many civilizations. Medieval observers, despite their tendency toward religious and cultural certainty in many areas, often expressed a profound sense of their own transience when confronting these ancient structures. How many kingdoms have risen and fallen while these monuments stood watching? Asked a 14th century pilgrim's account. How many faiths have been born, flourished and faded to memory under their impassive gaze? And what will they witness long after our own age has passed into dust? This perspective, seeing our own time as merely one chapter in a much longer story, offers a corrective to the chronological provincialism that treats the present as the culmination of history rather than a transitional moment between past and future. The pyramids invite us to adopt a longer view, to recognize our place within time's vastness, rather than imagining ourselves somehow outside or above its flow. Medieval thinkers, with their acute awareness of mortality and their cosmic sense of temporal scale, were often receptive to this invitation, allowing the pyramids to relativize their own epoch's claims to lasting significance. These stones will likely witness the end of our civilization as they witnessed its beginning, wrote a surprisingly prescient 15th century observer. They have outlasted pharaohs and Caesars, caliphs and crusaders. What hubris to believe our own works and words will prove more enduring. This clear-eyed recognition of temporal limitation did not lead to despair, but rather to a more grounded assessment of human achievement, an understanding that true greatness lies not in creating something that lasts forever, an impossible goal, but in contributing meaningfully to an ongoing human conversation across time. As we conclude this thematic reflection, we might consider what our own era's interpretations of the pyramids reveal about our contemporary concerns and blind spots. What aspects of these monuments are we uniquely positioned to understand, and what dimensions might remain invisible to us despite our technological and archaeological advantages? What will future observers, looking back at our interpretations, identify as the unmarked assumptions and cultural biases of our time? These questions remind us that our understanding of the past is always provisional, always shaped by the preoccupations of the present. The medieval perspectives we have explored were neither more nor less true than our own. They simply reflected different cultural contexts, different questions, different interpretive needs. By recovering these alternative ways of seeing, we enrich our own understanding, adding new dimensions to our appreciation of monuments that have accumulated layers of human meaning for over 4,000 years. The pyramids continue to watch over our collective attempts to make sense of time, mortality, and achievement. They have witnessed countless interpretations come and go, while remaining themselves unchanged, a paradox that captures something essential about the human relationship with the past. We cannot help but project our own concerns onto ancient stones, yet those stones maintain a stubborn independence, always exceeding our explanatory frameworks, always inviting new questions from new observers. In this ongoing dialogue between present interpretation and material persistence lies the endless fascination of great monuments that have become, through time's passage, not just artifacts of a particular culture but shared inheritance of all humanity. He was born to a world of prayer calls and desert winds. In the year 145 of the Common Era, Ibn Jubayr entered life in Valencia, a coastal jewel of Al-Andalus, where the Atlantic breeze carried the scent of salt and orange blossoms alike. His father, a jurist and scholar, imbued him with a love of learning. His mother, a gentle presence at home, taught him the power of observation. From childhood he listened to the muezzin's call spilling across the tiled roofs, harmonizing with the soft rustle of palm fronds. These early impressions, sound, scent, motion, would later shape his poetic eye, making him ever aware of the interplay between human ritual and the wider world. By the time he reached his 20s, he had mastered jurisprudence and mastered something more elusive, a curiosity that could not be sated by courts and books alone. His heart yearned for the Hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca prescribed by faith, and for the chance to realize all he had only read about. In 1183 he set out from his Andalusian home, not in robes of state, but in simple wool, clothes that would mark him as a seeker rather than a dignitary. He carried with him a small leather satchel of essentials, dates, dried apricots, a water gourd, and the slender notebooks in which he would record every observation, every minor wonder, every fleeting reverie. His route carried him first across the strait to North Africa, where the land shifted from green gardens to ochre desert. He traveled by mule and by boat, sometimes alone, sometimes in the company of merchants exchanging news of Venice or Cairo. Each new city offered fresh contrasts. Marrakesh's bustling souks, Cairo's minarets piercing the sky, Alexandria's harbors crowded with vessels from as far away as Spain and India. Everywhere, his keen intellect and courteous manners opened doors. Scholars greeted him in madrasas, merchants offered him tea, and storytellers gathered to share legends beneath vine-covered trellises. When he reached Egypt, he found himself in a world at once familiar and strange. The Nile, its waters brimming with life, flowed like an artery through the land. Along its banks, mud brick dwellings and date palms formed a green ribbon against the limitless gold of the desert beyond. Ibn Jubayr's guide, a cautious man named Rashid, steered him through crowded Cairo streets, avoiding narrow alleys where rumor warned of thieves. Yet even those dangers could not divert his attention. He paused to admire wooden lattices carved with geometric designs, marveled at the calligraphy curling across mosque domes, and drank in the aroma of roasting coffee beans for the very first time.
Soon the moment he had waited for arrived. The first glimpse of the pyramids. They appeared as three immense triangles crowned by sunlight, their pale limestone surfaces shimmering like ghostly mirrors. Rashid stopped the carriage at a distance, considered safe bandits, sometimes lurked nearer, and gestured without words for Ibn Jubayr to behold them. The traveller dismounted slowly, his satchel falling silent at his side. He walked forward until the heat-warmed stones towered above him, their scale so vast that he felt physically small, as though a child standing before giants. In his journal that night he wrote, "I have seen marvels before, yet never anything to compare with these stones. They rise from the desert, as if the earth itself had parted, revealing the bones of some ancient colossus. Their angles meet in impossible perfection. My mind struggles to conceive the labor that placed each block so precisely, and yet, for all their monumental weight, there is a grace here,
an elegance in the simplicity of shape that speaks of purposes both practical and divine. He spent days in their shadow. At dawn he watched as the first rays struck the smooth faces, igniting them in pale gold. At midday he traced the sharp edges with his fingertips, feeling the rough grains of sand still embedded in the stone. At dusk he saw their silhouettes etched against a violet sky, as if floating above the desert's edge. Each hour revealed a different character. Sunrise brought quiet majesty, noon, overwhelming presence, sunset, solemn mystery. Yet Ibn Jubayr was no mere tourist. His legal training guided his observations. He noted the inscriptions carved high on one pyramid, Arabic graffiti left by earlier pilgrims, and speculated on how many hands had traced those same verses in prayer. He asked the local guide about offerings made at the base, dates left in small piles, broken bits of pottery placed as tokens, and considered how popular devotion intertwined with ancient reverence. In his third night near the pyramids, he rose before dawn to perform his prayers, aligning himself with centuries of pilgrims who had stood in their shadow, seeking blessings. In that moment, the stones became more than monuments. They were markers on his own spiritual journey. More than once he recorded a sense of dialogue, as if the structures spoke back to him. He wrote, "I spoke aloud my wonder at their scale and perfection, and I felt in that vast silence an answer, a quiet promise that some human endeavors might endure beyond our own lifespan." This feeling transformed him. He had embarked on his journey, seeking religious fulfillment. He left with a deeper sense of time and self. The pyramids became, in his mind, waypoints on a pilgrimage, not only to Mecca, but toward an inner sanctuary. In Cairo's crowded streets, he carried within him the stillness of the desert. In the heat of his chambers, he recalled the cool shade beneath those ancient stones. When he finally continued toward Mecca, he took with him more than memories. His notebooks overflowed with reflections, comparisons between the monuments of Islam, minarets, domes, and the pyramids, meditations on the relationship between faithful devotion and monumental architecture, and most poignantly, thoughts on how finite acts of faith might echo through ages. Just as the pyramids echoed with each shifting light, he composed lines of poetry on those pages, verses in classical Arabic that wove together images of desert wind, starlit nights, and the silent grandeur of stone. In the moon's pale glow, I heard their breathing, as if the earth exhaled through ages long. I felt my prayer not lone but weaving through countless voices, ancient, soft, and strong. In Mecca, amidst the throng of pilgrims circling the Kaaba, Ibn Jubayr's mind returned repeatedly to the pyramids. He saw architectural echoes in the simple honesty of the black cloth, the rhythmic press of bodies in tawaf, and the straight paths of the pilgrim's march. He realized that human devotion could take many forms, some built of faith alone, others of stone and sweat, but each striving toward the same horizon of transcendence. Upon his return journey, he paused again in Cairo. This time when he approached the pyramids, he felt neither awe nor smallness but kinship. He knelt upon the sand and placed his journal on the ground, tracing a circle around it with his finger, a symbolic tawaf of the mind. He prayed quietly, not for pardon or guidance, but in gratitude for the sight that had humbled him, the labor that had inspired him, and the centuries of hands that had built and preserved and wondered as he did now. In the nearly 900 pages of his travelogue, Ibn Jubayr devoted a full chapter to these moments. He described technical details, the angle of the slopes, the structure of the chambers, and wove into them the tapestry of human experience, fear of desert spirits at night, joy at discovering a hidden crack of light in a sealed passage, the sweetness of shade beneath a solitary casuarina tree planted long after the pyramids rose. He captured voices, confreres of pilgrims praising Joseph's granaries, local storytellers whispering of Jinn at midnight, fellow scholars debating the alignment with Orion's belt, and underlying all these particulars lay his central insight, that the pyramids, for all their antiquity, belonged as fully to his own journey as to any pharaoh's. They were not relics of a distant world, divorced from his faith and his time. They were living markers on the road of human wonder, inviting each new witness to contribute their own reflections, to add their own stone to the edifice of collective memory. In the final paragraph of his chapter, written from a Cairo inn overlooking the Nile, he confessed, "I wondered if I would see these pyramids again, and then I realized that to remember them once is to carry them always. In every new horizon I greet, in every prayer I whisper beneath the sky, these stones stand beside me, ghostly companions on a journey that will never truly end." Thus Ibn Jubayr passed beyond mere observer to become one of the pyramid's myriad interpreters. Its account merged the technical with the transcendental, the measured with the poetic, weaving his own story into a tapestry that glimmers still in the pages of history, an enduring testament to how these ancient monuments shaped one pilgrim's heart, and how, through his words, they continue to shape ours. And now you drift back to your bed centuries away from those stone sentinels, carrying the echoes of desert wind and whispered prayers in your mind. Feel the gentle rise and fall of your chest, as steady as the slow shifting of sand dunes beneath an unmoving moon. You are safe here, wrapped in your own blankets, yet connected in a way that transcends time to the pilgrims, scholars, and artisans who once stood where you cannot, under the same vast canopy of stars, beneath the same sky that once witnessed the laying of the first limestone block. Your thoughts wander freely. You sense that the questions you carry about purpose, permanence, and wonder are not yours alone. They belong to every traveler who paused at dawn to watch the pyramids ignite in golden light, every monk who dipped quill in ink to describe their triangular majesty, every child who grew up hearing tales of giants and jinn weaving through those silent corridors. This realization brings comfort. In the quiet warmth of your room, you feel the gentle pulse of human curiosity that binds us all. Your breath slows as you imagine the countless voices, hushed with reverence or alight with speculation, echoing between those mighty stones. The pyramids have stood mute, witness to this chorus of wonder for thousands of nights, and now, even as you surrender to sleep, they remain awake in spirit, guardians of that timeless conversation. Allow your thoughts to soften. The detailed mysteries and scholarly debates dissolve into a simple truth that some questions are meant not to be answered definitively, but to flutter through the mind like moths around a lantern, illuminating new perspectives with each flutter of wings. You may never know precisely how those blocks were positioned, or the exact designs hidden in hieroglyphs long faded, yet the act of wondering itself becomes a gentle lullaby. Imagine the pyramids under a velvety night sky, their angles softened by moonlight, their edges blurred by drifting sands. Picture the vast silence around them, broken only by a distant call to prayer or the faint shuffle of a caravan's hooves. In that stillness, you feel kinship, not only with the builders, but with every creature that ever found shelter in their shadow, the desert fox curling at their base, the migrating bird resting on a lofty ledge, the traveler pausing to catch a breath. That sense of shared experience carries you deeper into calm. You breathe in the cool night air of Egypt, and breathe out the warmth of your blankets, exchanging breaths with history itself. There is no need to hold on to every fact or every narrative thread. Instead, let your mind release them one by one, like grains of sand slipping through relaxed fingers, until only the quiet hum of existence remains. And as you sink further into your mattress, know that the enduring presence of those stone triangles reflects the endurance within you, the resilience that carries you through each day and guides you through each night. Just as the pyramids have withstood centuries of sun, wind, and human doubt, so too does your spirit persist, shaped by experience yet open to change. In these final moments before sleep fully claims you, think of the pyramids as gentle watchers, their silent vigil extending from the earliest dawns of civilization to this very instant. They have watched armies march past, dynasties rise and fall, scholars transcribe their dimensions, poets spin verses in their honor, and now they watch over you, keeping a quiet promise that your wonder too is sacred. Let your eyelids grow heavy. Each beat of your heart becomes an echo of the ancient rhythm that pulses through the desert night. Each soft inhalation and exhalation, a reminder that you are both fleeting and eternal, a single moment in a long continuum of dreamers, seekers, and storytellers. And as your mind drifts toward the gentle darkness, carry this final thought with you: wonder never truly fades, it only transforms from conscious inquiry into the peaceful realm of dreams. The pyramids remain, unchanged yet ever renewed in each curiosity they inspire. Tonight, they stand watch over your rest, just as they have watched over countless souls before you, cradling your thoughts like soft dunes cradling seeds waiting to bloom. Now let the silence deepen. Let the weight of your limbs become softer than stone, softer than sand, softer even than your own breath. The questions may linger at the edge of awareness, but you need not chase them tonight. Instead, allow sleep to carry you onward, across the silent desert of your mind, guided gently by those ancient triangles, into a world where dreams become the newest layer of our shared human story. And in that hush, where words fall away, where only the soft beating of your heart remains, you rest watched over by time's enduring wonders, embraced by the timeless hush of stone and starlight.